Are you ready for the next one?
Bring him in.
Next.
Okay. Simon Henryberg, you have been selected by the President of the United States to go kill the Prime Minister of China.
Oh, that's not me. I think you have the wrong person. How much does a walrus weigh? Enough to break the ice. Hi, I'm Gracie.
Gracie Tranmer. Okay, you have been chosen by your bosses as a 3-week trip to go to the Arctic.
We want you to explore the ecosystem and observe all the organisms using natural selection and how they're varying their species in order to survive better in their environment. We also want you to keep track of all the non-renewable resources and renewable resources. Non-renewable resources are natural resources that are not replaced as they are used, while renewable resources are resources that are naturally replaced in a relatively short time.
Okay, this sounds like a good opportunity, but how long am I going to be there, and how long am I going to live down there?
3-week trip. Here's your jumpsuit to keep you warm. And we provided you with 3 weeks supply of food, water, and a little bit of shelter.
Okay, when do I leave?
Your plane leaves at 8. Don't be late.
So you just want me to study the ecosystem?
Yes. And at the end of your trip, we want you to make a model showing everything you've learned, especially the diets of all the animals.
So a food web.
Pretty much.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
It is now day 7 in the Arctic, and I have found a predation, a commensalism, a mutilism, and a parasitism. A predation is when one species benefits and the other is killed. The predation I found is when the wolf eats the caribou. The mutilism is when the caribou eats the shrubs and it makes fertilizer for the shrubs.
For the shrubs!
Commensalism is when one species benefits and the other is not affected.
Not affected.
The commensalism I found is when the caribou digs a hole.
A hole!
And he eats some lichens in that hole. And then the fox comes along, and in the caribou's hole, he digs deeper and finds some consumers to eat. And the parasitism is when one species benefits and the other is harmed. And the parasitism I found is when the tick goes on the caribou and the Arctic wolf, or the Arctic fox, either one, and sucks their blood. Yeah, that's pretty good. It is day 14 in the Arctic, and I haven't been seeing much Eskimo curlew because they're extinct, so I wasn't expecting to see much of them. But I also haven't seen any much beluga whales because they're endangered, and I didn't think that they would be endangered, but they are. And there are no invasive species because none of the species are able to adapt to the environment in the Arctic. Now, lately, I have been taking notes on positive and negative effects of human interactions. And a negative is that global warming comes from the increase of humans burning fossil fuels, and the Arctic temperatures have risen twice as fast, and the burning of fossil fuels increases carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, almost 35%. Greenhouse gases also come from a huge factor as to why the ice caps are melting. Around 385 miles squared of ice sheets have been lost. Now, a positive that the humans have found: by informing people about endangered and threatened species like polar bears, It encourages people to help the Arctic and discourage the pollution and heating of the Arctic. Those are the notes I have taken. It is now day 19 in the Arctic, and I've taken a couple more notes. I've been seeing lots of oil and gas off the coast. I saw a man in a small boat, and he told me there were at least 375 wells of oil and gas reservations. You know, it really worries me because there are non-renewable resources that are not only hurting the Arctic, but will soon run out. However, I saw two other renewable resources, water and few trees. Speaking of trees and water and all of that, I noticed 3 abiotic non-living factors: rocks, snow, and mountains. Adaptation is a characteristic that helps an organism survive in its environment and reproduce. A biotic factor is a living part of an ecosystem. Natural selection. Organisms with favorable variations for a particular environment survive, reproduce, and pass these variations on to the next generation. A niche is an organism's particular role in an ecosystem. A vestigial structure is a remnant of a structure that may have had an important function in a species' ancestors but has no clear function in modern-day species. Oh my. Speaking of natural selection, that reminds me a lot about Charles Darwin.
In 1831, Charles Darwin took a 5-year expedition on a boat called the Beagle. During this time, he served as a geologist, botanist, and zoologist. Darwin landed in the Galapagos Islands. He noticed these islands were unique. He began to notice that different types of finches ate different foods with different shaped beaks. This helped him come up with the theory of natural selection. He studied this theory for 20 years. Think of it like this. This is species 1. Species 1 eventually began to die out. Years later, the same species became smaller, faster, and had increased senses. This was caused by natural selection.
In 1859, he wrote a book called On the Origin of Different Species by Means of Natural Selection. At this time, most Europeans just believed in the religious idea that God created the world in 7 days and everything in it. This book spoke against the belief, making religious people upset, which caused churches to criticize the book.
Oh my gosh, there's a polar bear eating a seal!
Here comes the polar bear, waiting to attack his prey.
Oh my gosh, did you see how the polar bear blended in with the snow with its white fur? That's an example of camouflage. Wow, look how that uses its speed to get away from its predators. For self-defense. Having spent 3 weeks in the Arctic, I have come up with this food web. Down here are the producers. Right here are the herbivores, the omnivores, the carnivores, the top-level consumers, the scavenger, and the decomposer. The producers that I found that were mainly in the Arctic were the bearberry, the Arctic willow, the purple sassafras, and the phytoplankton. The main herbivores I found were the reindeer, the rock ptarmigan, the Arctic hare, and the amphipod. But all of the reindeer, the rock ptarmigan, and the Arctic hare eat the Arctic willow. The amphipod eats the phytoplankton, the Arctic hare eats the purple sassafras, the rock ptarmigan eats the purple sassafras. And then up here, the main omnivores that we found were the king crab, the Arctic fox, the Arctic ground squirrel, and the wolverine. Okay, so the wolverine eats the Arctic hare and the bearberry. The Arctic ground squirrel eats the eggs of the rock ptarmigan. The Arctic fox eats the Arctic hare and the bearberry. The king crab eats the Borregata seta and the phytoplankton. Up here with the carnivores, we have the ringed seal, the beluga whale, the ermine, and the Borregata seta. The Borregata seta eats the amphipod. The ermine eats the Arctic hare and the rock ptarmigan. The beluga whale eats the Borregata seta and the king crab. The ringed seal eats the Borregata seta. Now our top level consumers are the polar bear and the Arctic wolf. The Arctic wolf eats the reindeer, the Arctic fox, and the Arctic ground squirrel. The polar bear eats the Borregata seta, the Arctic hare, the rock ptarmigan, and the beluga whale, and the ringed seal, the wolverine, and the Arctic ground squirrel. The snowy owl eats the dead carcasses of all of these consumers. And the Arctic raven decomposes them down. Breaks them down. And then it goes around to the bottom, to the producers. And it makes fertilizer for the producers.